Astro Kids, and welcome back. Today we're doing something completely different. I am answering a question from one of you. Thank you so much for this question. And this is really a complicated question because, for starters, when we are talking about what is better, we are coming from a place of opinion. So this is a subjective question. Whether Vedic astrology, to be more specific, is better or not really is depending on who is using it and what knowledge you have on this system of astrology. And as far as I know, there are 3 different systems that are using these 12 constellations. If there are more, go ahead and let me know down below in the comments. But there's 3 main ones that I want to focus on when answering this question. And I think the better way to phrase this question would be, is Vedic astrology more valid or more accurate when using it in astrology? And so, for starters, when I first got into astrology, I was using Western astrology, which is what most people end up starting out with if you are in the US. So Western astrology is a system that actually uses the tropical zodiac. And so this is a huge point to make, is that there are 2 different zodiac systems. There is the tropical zodiac and the sidereal zodiac. And so when I first started using astrology, I was using Western tropical astrology. And that particular zodiac is based upon the seasons. And so these are fixed degrees that we're talking about with the tropical zodiac. This is every year around the spring equinox when we have 0 degrees of Aries, and everything is dependent upon that point. So it is about the seasons. And of course, this would be different if you lived in a different area where your seasons are reversed. So if you were in Australia, for example, then that Aries of 0 degrees Aries would always start out on the autumnal equinox. So it is all about the seasons and how those seasons are shifting and remaining. That is really what makes up the tropical zodiac. And so from this perspective of our seasonal shifts here on Earth, we have that zodiac. And so this is another reason why I say this is really a question that is dependent on your opinion, on your perspective, because really the tropical zodiac does exist, right? It is a system that is focused upon our seasonal shifts here on Earth. Now, the sidereal zodiac, which is what is typically used in Vedic astrology, is also used in another system that I wanted to talk briefly about, which is the true sidereal system. So the sidereal zodiac is actually based upon the true position of the stars. And in Vedic astrology, this is what we are primarily focused on, is what are those actual positioning of the stars in the sky. And this is, for the most part, pretty much accurate to those positions. Except, what happens is these constellations are actually different shapes and sizes within the sky. And so there are some of these constellations that are smaller, that are longer, that are larger. And so some of them take up more space than others. But what we do in Vedic astrology is we give each of those constellations an even 30 degrees. So even though they are taking up different amounts of spaces within the sky, the way that we actually analyze it is based upon 30 degrees per the constellation. And so it is just about accurate to those position of the stars. Not quite as, again, those stars are going to take up different amounts of shapes and sizes. Now, one of the things that I think that makes Vedic astrology more of an accurate tool is how exact it is. And so in Vedic astrology, what we do is we not only look at the constellations, but we look at the stars behind the constellations, which are called nakshatras or lunar mansions. And so those division of stars that fall behind the constellation get us a more exact representation of these signs. Because not everyone who falls within one sign is going to behave in the same way. So if you are a Scorpio, for example, and you were born within the first degrees of Scorpio, and someone else you know is also a Scorpio, but they were born within the last degrees of Scorpio, then your behaviors are not going to be the same. That individual who is born within the last degrees of Scorpio is most likely going to be more intense, more deep and introspective. Whereas though the individual who's born at the beginning of Scorpio will tend to be more elegant, more glamorous, more focused on success, a business person. And so we see that based upon where a person is born, according to the degrees of the sign, that is going to give us a more accurate representation of how that personality will play out. And another big thing that is focused on in Vedic astrology is the moon over the sun. So in tropical astrology, we put a huge focus on the sun sign, and there's this huge focus upon this sort of superficial personality. But in Vedic astrology, we look at the moon as the primary personality, because the moon is really the mind, right? The moon is how we think and feel. So the moon is essentially going to form the patterns and cycles within our life. And so for those of us who are looking at our sun sign, the sun sign is great because it shows us our identity. It shows us our passion, our ambition, our sense of authority and dominance. But the moon is actually the one that is running the gears behind the sun. And so the moon is vitally important to look at and understand, because this is what is going to actually shape these patterns and behaviors within a person. And so we could look at the sun and say that based upon their sun sign, that they would be very wealthy, but maybe their moon sign indicates that they don't find happiness in that wealth, that they need something else to feel that security, to feel that nourishment. And that is where the moon sign comes in. So that's a huge part of what we look at in Vedic astrology. Another thing that I've found also is that in tropical Western astrology, there's a huge focus on the ascendant or rising sign, or as it's also referred to as Lagna in Vedic astrology. There's a huge focus on that being this superficial part of who we are, of just the surface of how we come off. In Vedic astrology, we are more so looking at that point as the soul's incarnation, right? That is the exact point of which the soul has entered into its new life. And so that ascendant is actually a vital point in Vedic astrology as it lays out the foundation of a person's physical life. And I think that that is a huge thing in Vedic astrology, is that we look at the sun, the moon, and the ascendant as parts of who we are. The sun being more of the ego, of what we aspire for in life. The moon being more of the mind, of how we feel, how we think, and how that is actually affecting our behaviors and our patterns and cycles throughout life, and the ascendant of our actual physical experience throughout life. So all of these things together are important to look at. Another huge thing, though, that I've seen in tropical Western astrology is that we tend to look at some of these placements in a superficial way. And I think that one of the biggest things in Vedic astrology is that we really want to break down these placements in a multitude of different ways to get a more accurate description of those placements. And so it's not quite as simple as one would think it is. You want to look at a condition of a planet, you want to look at what house it's in, you want to look at, is that particular planet a functioning malefic? Is it neutral? Is it positive for the ascendant? You want to look at the aspects. Are Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn making any aspects? Is Rahu and Ketu involved? All of these different things that you want to look at, including the nakshatras and going into the padas of the nakshatras. And so there's so many different things of how we can actually break down these placements, and it becomes very deep and complex, which gives us more of an accurate representation of what is going on. Now, I think also one of the big things to point out is that in some of these traits or qualities that we give to the zodiac signs, there is actually a difference between the tropical system and the Vedic system. Because we want to remember that Vedic astrology comes from scripture, right? This is coming from ancient Sanskrit. And so some of the representations of the personality actually is different. So, for example, in tropical astrology and in Vedic astrology, there is this discussion about Scorpio being this sign that is very secretive, very sexual, very intense, and so on. But what we also see is that in tropical astrology, we tend to look at the sign of Scorpio as being this seductive or charming sign, and we actually give that to Libra in the Vedic system, right? We see Libra as the charmer in the Vedic astrology. So there are little pieces of the information that we have as far as the personalities that do vary and different depending on what system you are using. And so one of the big things here is that, yes, it is agreed upon that in both systems that Scorpio is a secretive sign. But in one system, we look at Scorpio as being this more intense, introspective type of sign. And in the other system, we see it as this charming, seductive type of sign. So the energies there can actually vary and differ. And this is really a longer discussion that has to do with looking at those houses and how the houses are being activated based upon the ascendant. Because what we typically see is that in the tropical system, we do tend to give different meanings to some of the houses. For example, when we are looking at a Sagittarius ascendant, we might say from the tropical perspective that that individual is secretive because they have the sign of Scorpio, which is a very mysterious sign back in their 12th house of hidden things. However, in the Vedic system, we actually look at Scorpio as that secretive sign, because now we're putting the sign of mystery out in front where everyone can see you. So there is a huge variation that's happening depending on how you look at those systems. And so again, I can't really give you an objective answer to that. It really is based upon your experience, your knowledge, and understanding of how all of this plays out. For me personally, yes, Vedic astrology is more of where I'm leaning towards, where I'm headed towards on my journey. I did start out with tropical astrology, and I did have a good experience with that. I learned a lot through the tropical system, and I was able to use it accurately to make predictions, to use it to actually help and inspire others along their journey. But I've moved towards Vedic astrology because this is where I have intuitively felt led to. And something that I found the more that I've gotten into Vedic astrology is how deep and complex it is, and how it gives us more of these accurate, precise ways of looking at the different aspects of our life and what is going on universally within the world as well. Now, the last thing that we could potentially compare this system to is the true Sidereal Zodiac. And that system is similar to Vedic astrology. The biggest difference is that it takes into account the actual sizes and shapes of the constellations. And another big factor that's happening in the true Sidereal Zodiac is adding in a 13th sign. So we talk about Vegas being a additional zodiac sign because it touches that zodiac belt, the ecliptic that the sun takes yearly. And so it is taken into account a ficus when we are using that 13th zodiac constellation system of the true Sidereal Zodiac. Another thing that is not really focused on in the true Sidereal Zodiac is those nakshatras and padas and dashas and so forth. There's multiple things that we could discuss when it comes to Vedic astrology, layers upon layers of how to actually break down a chart. And this is what gets us to that very accurate, specific, detailed report that we can give when using Vedic astrology. This also helps us when actually looking at what is going on in the world, how it's affecting us, but also there are deeper aspects of tropical astrology that we can use as well to look at what is going on universally also. And so it really is, again, depending on your knowledge, your understanding, and your interpretation. And the interpretation piece of it is a huge part. Because if you are taking in all of this information and not fully digesting and understanding it, and giving out these predictions and this information based upon something that you don't fully comprehend, then that interpretation is not going to be correct. And this is where the astrology community can get into trouble, where there is a lot of non-belief among the astrology community is from many who don't have the full information or the full story of what is really going on, and they're just putting out this superficial or recycled information that is not fully accurate. And I think that a big piece of using astrology also, which is really great, is if you have an intuitive gift, because this is going to help you to really interpret and break down these things with even more accuracy as you're being guided by spirit. So this is my answer, my long answer on why I think that Vedic astrology is more accurate. Again, I don't think that Vedic astrology is more valid because tropical astrology does exist. It is a real thing that is based upon the changing of the seasons that we have every year. So again, that is a fixed zodiac, where the Sidereal Zodiac is a moving zodiac in the sky. It is actually proceeding along that ecliptic. So this is why we see that shift in the ages. You actually have to understand sidereal astrology to see what age are we in, because it all has to do with the precession of the equinoxes. So that's a huge point to make, right? There's a huge discussion in the astrology community right now that is about the age of Aquarius. To understand those ages, you have to understand the precession of the equinoxes, and you have to be able to understand how all of this plays out. Again, being able to actually break down all of the different layers of the astrology to understand it at a deeper capacity. So I hope you all enjoyed this, and I hope this answered your question. If you have any additional questions, feel free to leave it in the comments. If you like this video, feel free to leave a thumbs up. And if you're new to this channel, as always, make sure to hit that subscribe button along with the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any new content. And once again, I want to mention that that Mercury retrograde video is up if you are interested. The full moon that is happening at the end of January is also up for you as well. So feel free to check out those videos. I will leave links down in the description. And also, we have new lectures available if you are in the Facebook group, Astrology Lessons with Daquan Jones, or if you are on Patreon. So you will see those lessons available there if you are in those two groups. And those lectures will be made available very soon on Udemy, so I will keep you updated with that. All of that information for the classes will be down in the description as well as the comments. If you're interested in my free blog, that is also there in the description. And of course, my services are down below in the description. I am using Vedic Astrology now. So if you are looking for a Vedic Astrology interpretation, feel free to contact me. And of course, your time of birth is going to be a huge important factor that is going to help give the most accuracy to that reading. I hope you all have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.